Are these guns battle-proof enough? First, we need to talk about how bad sand can choke a gun. For the test, they seal it in a chamber, blast it with fine powder, and count every single time it malfunctions. What they do is they put a rifle in, run the fans blowing sand for a while, and then pull it out and make it shoot. Every moving part has a few thousandths of an inch of room around it. It's thinner than a sheet of paper. And that tolerance is either too tight or too loose. The dust fills the gaps almost guaranteed every time. And it does two jobs at once. It packs into the corners until the parts physically run out of room to travel. And it grinds, because dust is mostly quartz and quartz is harder than steel. So every stroke of the action drags that grit across the metal like sandpaper. Now here's the backwards part. You think oil makes it worse? Because you might think the dust sticks to oil and it probably will jam, right? But a soaking wet gun actually runs better in dust, because the oil floats the grit and carries it out of the joint instead of letting it pack into a hard crust. When the Army buried 4 carbines in dust in one of their tests, one of them run nearly dry, and it jammed thousands of times. And that same rifle drowned in oil jammed under 700. So, the dust room is really about finding the fit tolerance. Tight tolerance guns shoot more accurately, but way too high maintenance. Looser guns may rattle, but they keep running as long as it's not a ridiculous amount of sand. The magazine is the single most common reason a gun stops working, that often gets overlooked. While the gun can be designed perfectly to work in theory, but the magazine has to do its job feeding. When the Army buried those 4 carbines in dust, a large share of the stoppages traced back to the magazine rather than to the rifle at all. So they test the box on its own. They drop it loaded onto concrete on every corner, and then check whether the feed lips spread, because a few thousandths of an inch of movement up there changes the angle a round chamber's at, and a round leaving at the wrong angle is a jam. They leave magazines loaded for months to see whether the spring loses its spring constant, and they cycle the follower thousands of times, watching for it to tilt and bind in the tube. They even shoot the mag to see if it can still feed the rounds up without tilting or get stuck. So the magazine test exists because the most expensive part of the whole system keeps getting stopped by the part you can buy for a few dollars. The sandblast. Dust is fine powder, so under about 150 microns, they drift through the air at roughly walking speed. This type of test can really beat up the surface of the gun, even if it looks like nothing. And that's because dust can clog, and sand can actually cut. At that speed, every grain is a tiny chisel, so it strips finish, it can round off edges, and it can really beat up optics if you don't cover them up. And it can chew through anything painted or coated. Endurance test. A duty gun should last a certain number of rounds over its service life, usually in the high 6-figure range benchmark. And metal that gets stressed back and forth that many times will break eventually. So to test this, they bolted the gun into a fixture. Nobody's aiming at anything specific, they're just feeding it until something breaks. It's really testing how much heat and everything else it can handle. What they are really testing is metal fatigue. Fatigue is stranger than it sounds because steel doesn't wear out to the naked eye. But if you take a paper clip and bend it back and forth, it doesn't gradually go soft and droop. It will snap, all at once at the point of ultimate failure, right where you kept bending it. It's the same thing here, except the bend is microscopic, and it happens thousands of times. Every shot throws the slide back and stops it hard, and every one of those cycles leaves a crack you'd need a microscope to see. And that's pretty much why firearms metallurgy is a huge STEM industry, to always come up with better materials, better research to make gun parts. In most cases, most manufacturers want to make things lightweight, and that will never go away. But also, they have to balance the strength-to-weight ratio. Carbon steel remains by far the common material for critical firearm components like your barrels, bolts, and receivers. However, not just any steel can be used to make guns. So the crack grows a hair per shot for years. And then, one day there isn't enough metal left behind it, and you know it's going to break, which is why these failures feel so random. the gun was genuinely fine like yesterday, because yesterday the crack was still small enough. Every design has one part destined to die first, and the job is finding out which part and at what round count, so they can design it in a way it can be replaced easily. On the Beretta M9, that part turned out to be the slide. On the Sig P320, it was the frame. And on a lot of guns, it's just the springs and pins that quietly getting weaker the more you use it. For context, Beretta said the troops were using overpowered ammo, like the ammo was beating the gun up. Then the Army came back and said, the steel in those early slides just wasn't tough enough, so either make a better gun, or we're gonna just go with someone else. The drop test. When a pistol hits concrete, the outside of it stops instantly, but literally everything inside may still flutter a little and move slightly, like the vibration and everything you can see on a high-speed footage, because momentum is doing all the work. Most drop tests are done at shoulder height, but to make it really battle-proof, they had to throw it off like a moving vehicle, helicopter, and some tests even throw it and then drag it behind a truck. And that is what makes it dangerous, because those safety parts are held in place by tiny springs, and those springs cannot move until someone deliberately presses the trigger. So, in a nasty drop like this, a part that weighs almost nothing suddenly shoves with hundreds of times its own weight. This whole thing then becomes a geometry problem. Every part inside can only travel in one direction, so the drop only matters if the gun lands on the angle that lines up with that direction. Think of the famous 320. When you dropped it flat, it's pretty much fine. Dropped it with the muzzle pointed down, it's still fine. But if you dropped backward at a slight angle, the trigger's own weight swung it to the rear and the gun fired. The scariest part is, some of these recalled guns out there even went off on its own without dropping them on hard surfaces, like putting it in a tight holster.
All right. 320? Yep. All right. God damn it, dude. Get this gun off my range. Don't bring it back on the range.
The heat test. In a real gunfight, you dump mag after mag as fast as you can feed it, and the gun gets hot enough, like so hot that it might set off a round by itself in the chamber. Hot enough to cause heat damage. This is mostly the barrel. This part gets the hottest of all. Metal expands when it's hot, not by much that you can physically see, but a gun's clearances are tiny to start with. So parts that had room to move now rub against other parts, creating more friction if it's already not maintained well. So, 3 separate things are happening here. First, the chamber becomes like a hot oven with a live round sitting in it. If you leave it in there long enough, and the heat alone might sets it off, with nobody near the trigger. That is called a cook-off, and it's why you'll see someone clear a hot machine gun instead of leaving one in the pipe. And this is pretty common to see dedicated machine guns use the open chamber design, because nothing is pushed into the chamber until the bolt slams forward and fires simultaneously, while your typical rifles use a closed bolt design that puts one in the chamber. Second, whatever isn't metal will melt, mostly on the handguard for a rifle. Your plastic parts don't stand a chance if you keep pushing it. For example, the H&K's XM8 had exactly that happen, where the plastic handguard was basically started to melt under heavy fire. Third, and this is the one that destroyed most guns eventually, and your zero starts to shift. The example I want to talk about was the H&K G36 held its barrel in a plastic chassis, so as the gun gets hot, the plastic flexed and the barrel drifted. And it didn't even take a glowing red-hot barrel to really destroy it. When the German tested these, they found the rifle landing about 7 shots out of 100 at 100 meters after a fairly modest warm-up. So a rifle that shot fine at the start of a firefight was missing after a few mags. Historically, gunmetal was originally composed of bronze. It's made up of an alloy containing copper, tin, and zinc. But these designs evolved to iron in the search for harder and more durable materials. So, the science behind gun and steel manufacturing matured together in the 19th century, at least in the United States. Guns began transitioning to steel during and after the Civil War, and began classifying carbon steels using the system we still use today. The freezing test. Carry a rifle in from 40 below, and the warm, wet air inside hits that freezing steel and condenses all over it. It's the same way a cold drink sweats on a summer afternoon. The gun sweats on the inside too, down in the action where you can't see it, and can't even wipe it. And it keeps sweating until it freezes and welds the parts together. When it's fully frozen, it's nearly impossible to make it go bang. If the ice is jam-packed in the barrel, don't even think about firing it. Most people had to work the charging handle over and over for the first few minutes, just to clear up whatever that is stuck as they cool. The oil also turns on you too because standard lubricant at 50 below thickens to molasses, so the slide won't move freely, and the firing pin swings way too slow, causing light primer strike anyway. That's why there are temperature ratings on these lubricants and some won't freeze. Ice and mud are the same problem in different clothes. Both fill space that has to stay empty and neither one compresses. The erosion test. Every time a gun fires, a jet of gas at a few thousand degrees rips through the couple of inches just ahead of the chamber, right where the bullet first bites into the rifling. That gas is hotter than the melting point of the steel around it, and it's moving fast, so it scrubs away a tiny amount of metal on every single shot and heat checks the surface into a fine web of cracks. So the rifling slowly retreats up the barrel, and the bullet that used to grip the rifling immediately now gets a running start before it hits anything, so it slams into the rifling instead of easing into it. Your shot groups may drift, muzzle velocity gets inconsistent, and the gun feels exactly the same in your hands the whole way down, and you can't see it. When you hear people say chrome-lined barrels, this is what they are talking about. It's like a cooking pan. Over time, it's going to peel off its coating. Different ammunition also erodes at different rates. The mud test. Battlefields are wet and filthy. You might crawl through mud, you might accidentally drop your gun in a nasty puddle. You might even fight in the rain or snow. Mud does something completely different from dust, because while the dust grinds, the mud just takes up more room, and it won't squash out of the way easily. So a gun works by parts sliding into space where there shouldn't be anything there. But if you pack that space with a wet paste-looking gunk in there that can't compress, and the part stops working. The gun just needs enough wiggle room to work. If you jam-pack an AK with enough mud and gunk, it will stop working. Regardless of what legendary myths you might have heard about how indestructible it is. Sealing a gun up tighter makes it worse in mud, because a little always gets in anyway, through the muzzle, like the ejection port and all the tiny openings. And once it's in, there's nowhere for it to go. If you like this type of content, please watch these from this playlist.